All right, so today we are going to talk about ASR, which is the Azure Site Recovery. So if you remember, we started discussing about the Azure backup, and now we are talking about the site recovery, which is basically a integral part of business continuity and disaster recovery solution offered by Microsoft. So BCDR, business continuity and disaster recovery. So business continuity is being achieved by Azure Backup Solution, which we have extensively put efforts to, implement it and configure, troubleshoot, performed various tasks, and we also discussed about the interview questions and all, right? So today we will start with the ASR, which is a disaster recovery solution, Azure Site Recovery, and we'll talk about the process today. Okay, what process we have to follow, what are the components you have, and then in the next session, we'll try to implement the ASR. We'll perform the different operations, and I will tell you what are the best practices you have to follow, what are the checklists you have to follow when the real DR occurs, right? And what kind of business use cases customers usually, have, right? And how do they monitor the replication and this entire disaster recovery process? And who is actually taking care of this DR process? As Azure admin, what is your role in this solution? Okay, so before we always write, what we generally do before we go for learning any service, we'll try to understand the problem statement. What is the problem statement, and what is the solution which is going to help us? And if it is going to help us, how we are going to implement it? And once we implement it, and how we are going to manage it? Okay, and how you once you know how to manage it, right? So you will know what are the best practices, common issues, and what are the best practices to implement the solution. Okay, the problem statement I'm going to talk about is the the solution, like the virtual machine. This ASR is specifically designed for the Azure virtual machines, not for any other Azure components. So most of the people confuse, okay, I have Azure storage account, can I use ASR to as a disaster recovery solution, right? ASR is designed for Azure virtual machines, and ASR also can be used for on-premises servers as well as a disaster recovery solution. We are focusing on ASR for the Azure virtual machines. So the business problem I will tell you. So let us say you have your Azure virtual machines in one of the region, okay? And this is our web server. Let's say it's a very critical web application that is running inside this machine. And so while you're working, so you got to know that, so it is quite common that our virtual machines might be down in the Microsoft Azure platform. Then you have decided to implement the high availability solutions by keeping the VMs in a availability set or availability zone, right? So you guys might have remember what is an availability set, what is availability zone, right? So with this AV set or AV zone, so what we are going to do is we are going to ensure that at least one virtual machine is highly available during the planned maintenance or unexpected downtime at Microsoft. And listen guys, this is again an issue that is caused because of Microsoft platform. You are hosting your virtual machines in Microsoft data center, and in case of any issue at Microsoft or any planned activity at Microsoft data center where your virtual machines are running, so if because of that, if the virtual machine is impacted, you might be in problems. So with the availability set and availability zone concept, we are going to ensure that at least one virtual machine is highly available during such planned maintenance or unexpected downtime situations. Okay. So what we generally do is, if you recall our previous discussions, so you will have virtual machines, and you keep them in availability set or availability zone. And this virtual machine is part of a virtual network, and this virtual network might have multiple um, subnets. So I'm going to say this is my web subnet where my virtual machine is exist. And these are the web servers, and we have one energy, which is a web energy, which controls the inbound and outbound traffic for our virtual machines or applications running inside the virtual machines. And this is our web VNet. Okay, and this is all hosted in one of the resource group. Let's say this is the web RG, which is basically a production RG. We can say RG hyphen environment. If I say prod hyphen web application 01. Okay. And let us say this is hosted in a east to west location. Okay, this is hosted in east to west location. So, and obviously, if you want to keep the high availability, so what we generally configure is, we'll configure the load balancer. It can be internal load balancer, external load balancer, okay, which basically route the traffic to one of the available backend server. In case if one server is not available due to any reason, the load balancer will route the traffic to the another server in the backend. Okay, so this is the environment at a simple, as a sample, environment if I present you, right? So this is what you have it, and you put high availability solutions here. So, and you are thinking that everything is going well and there won't be any problem. So all of a sudden your customers complain that the web application is not accessible. The website is not accessible. So that is when you start analyzing, your environment by looking at the servers. Okay, servers looks like this status shows running, but virtual network, everything is fine. Load balance is working fine. But when you go to the Microsoft Azure portal and go to the service health status, you might see the East US region, right? East US region is down because of some DNS issues or some network changes happened at Microsoft data center. So basically, could be any reason, right? So the East US environment is down. The East US environment is down. And because of that, the virtual machine status shows running, okay, but one of the other component within the data center or within that region is impacted. And because of that, your services are down. And since it is the major outage, you already know what is a major outage and what is minor outage from the previous sessions. Because it is a major outage, multiple customers are impacted over the world, right? And sometimes it may take more time to resolve issue by Microsoft. So if it is taking 30 minutes, 1 hour also for a very business critical applications, it's a huge downtime and it's going to be huge loss for the customers and as a company as well, right? So you might lose some critical customers because of this outage as well. So when it comes to the business, it might be a huge impact. So what companies does is, they always look for the disaster recovery solutions. So disaster, as part of the disaster recovery solution, what we generally do, if it is not an Azure, so you will have another site, so which is basically a different location, which is far away from your primary location. So there you'll have the same set of servers, let's say VNet, and you'll have the subnets, and you'll have the virtual machines running. And between these virtual machines, there will be data synchronization continuously happen. So both the regions, the servers are up and running. And in case if the primary is down, they'll ensure that this is active and users requests are coming to this server, this environment, a secondary environment, I would say, right? So with this approach, what you are going to achieve is, you are going to achieve the business continuity and disaster recovery process. The only thing is that you have to put a lot of investment in terms of the infrastructure cost, and you need people to monitor the servers and troubleshoot. I mean, replication has to be in a good state, and various things will be there, right? And though you're not using these servers uh, entire all the time, you're investing for the compute cost, storage cost, and maintenance cost. So that's why this is not a feasible solution. So with the Azure Site Recovery, right? With the Azure, Microsoft introducing the native solution, which is Azure Site Recovery, what we do, we follow the similar approach, but there's only one change here is, you don't see any server created here. Instead of that, you will have the disks created. Okay, we say ASR replica disk. Okay, so to these disks, the data will be replicated. Okay, so which means if your virtual machine one has, let's say, one OS disk and let's say two data disk. Okay, two data disks. So what happens is, for this specific virtual machine and the target location, you will have one OS disk replica. Let's say this is a web VM1 OS hyphen replica disk. Similarly, You will have one for data disk 1, and there will be one for data disk 2. Okay, so which means for each virtual machine, the number of disk what you have in the source, and then the target, you will have a replica disk that creates it, that will be created automatically. And whatever the changes that are happening in the source will automatically synchronize to the target location. Okay, and this synchronization or replication, we say replication, right? This replication process is a continuous replication. So as in when the changes happen on the source location, the changes will be replicated to the target location. And right, so as soon as the replication is completed, you will have the recovery points that are getting created. Okay, the recovery points are created based on certain conditions. So we have a crash consistency recovery points, which basically generated every 5 minutes. This is by design and this is by process. So you cannot modify this crash consistency recovery point. But there is something called application consistency recovery point, which will be generated, or you can also say you can disable this option as well. If you wish to enable the application consistency recovery point, you have to set this frequency in the replication policy. Maybe you can say every 1 hour or 4 hours or more than that as well. Okay, this has to be set in the replication policy. Okay, with the replication policy, the application consistency recovery point is going to be created, and whatever the recovery point that is getting created for both of them, right? So in the replication policy, you are going to specify how long it has to be retained. Is it 24 hours or 48 hours? I believe maximum is 72 hours, but I need to check it out. Okay, so 24 to 48 hours is I know that it's possible, but 72 hours is something that we have to check it out. Okay, so this is how with this approach, right? So whatever the data you're storing in the target, maximum you're going to store it for 72 hours. Okay, today I have some data, and that data will be available maximum of 72 hours or 48 hours, right? So with this, you are going to save the cost for the storage. At the same time, you are going to save the cost for the compute as well. So now you might have a question. Okay, so it's good, replications happening, and you have the recovery points and recovery point of retention. But in case if the primary region is down, how do I bring up this environment into the target? So what happens is ASR has intelligence, okay? And when you perform the failover, so I will talk to you about the different stages we have to reach to this level, right? So we have to perform the failover. When you do the failover, ASR is going to use the data in these disks, in the replica disk, and it's going to create a new disk out of it. Okay, create a new disk, and from the new OS disk, it's going to create a new virtual machine and attach all the remaining disks to this virtual machine. And this process, we say failover process, right? This process takes hardly 15 to 30 minutes. In my experience, I have seen within 15 minutes only, but sometimes if in case you have this server, the server has many disks, maybe the OS disk have some problem, maybe some issue at Microsoft, right? So for such scenarios, it might take a little bit longer, but within 30 minutes of time, you should be able to see the, target environment is ready. So now the question here is, okay, there is an outage and it's a major outage, maybe a minor outage, whatever it is, right? Your services are impacted, your virtual machine is impacted, your customers are impacted, right? So now when to take this decision, should I fail over or just keep it like this, right? If you want to fail over, right, the approximate time what you are going to have is 30 minutes. So if you fail over within 30 minutes, your servers will be online in different region, and your customers can start accessing the application. Let's say consider this as a 1 hour, right? Just 1 hour. So if you don't do failover, and if you give that 1 hour time for Microsoft, will they fix the problem or not? If they fix within 1 hour, probably you might communicate to your customer saying that there is a outage. So you will see the services online very soon. But if you are not confident, then you have to go for this DR solution. So it's all decision is being taken care by the senior leadership and the management. It's not thing in your hand. You might give your suggestions saying, okay, if I do a failover and in this region there are, let's say, 50 servers, and if I do failover for 50 servers, it might take approximately 1 hour of time, right? And post failover there are some other things that you have to perform, depends on the environment. So you are going to give your opinion on the DR solution. All right, then leadership will team will work with Microsoft. You will have to work with Microsoft and try to get an estimated time. So what happens with the Microsoft when such scenarios happen? They may not be able to give you the estimated time. They keep on working on it to fix the problem. They continuously start working the problem, but they may not be able to give you the exact ETA to fix the problem from their side, right? So sometimes it took 1 hour, it takes 1 hour, sometimes it takes 2 hours. I've seen, like, 4 to 5 hours, hours as well in the past. So in such scenarios, DR is the best solution. That is when they decide, okay, so we are going with the DR process, and there will be a team manages the DR process, and they will start the communication, and you are going to initiate the failover. You have to track everything, right? So from your side, you're going to failover, and Microsoft is going to create virtual machines automatically in the target region for the virtual machines where this replication is enabled. Okay, so this is the whole process of solving a problem of outage at Microsoft, which is causing your environment. And it's not always Microsoft. In case if you think, you know, you have the replications happening and your application team made some changes, okay? And, those changes is really difficult to revert it, and the changes are applied to both the servers. So, and you don't have the backup, right? So if you want to fail over this to another region with the old recovery point, you can also use this, but this is like very least scenario that you come across. But the major scenario for ASR is being used for regional outages, just because of issue at Microsoft. In case if you have any outage at your environment where this entire environment is down, you have the recovery points from the last 72 hours or 48 hours. If you want to go back, you can just go back there and try to bring up your environment. But if it is not a regional outage by Microsoft, if you have a backup, you don't need to go with this solution. Okay, if you have a regional outage at Microsoft and services are not online, it's taking time, that's when you can take a decision to perform the failover and bring up the environment to the target. This is a problem statement. The solution is this one. And now you are going to learn how to set up this one. Okay. So what we will try to do is, see, we want to feel the same, like, real-time environment, right? In this lab. So what we will do is in the next session, we are going to set up the virtual machines, couple of virtual machines with the high availability with the load balancer and with VNet, subnet and everything. Then I will help you with the configuring of ASR, how you configure the ASR, and post failover, how the customer's data or request automatically reaches the secondary location. So in this, we will use another component, which is the Azure Traffic Manager. So with the help of Traffic Manager, we will route the traffic to the second region. So Azure Traffic Manager has a profile. So we say it's a priority based profile. You are going to set up the priority for the primary and second region. So every time the request coming from the internet goes to the primary region, in case if the primary is not available, the request automatically go to the secondary region. So during this, outages, obviously Microsoft cannot, when Microsoft outage is happening, web servers cannot respond back to the load balancer, or load balancer cannot respond to the Azure Traffic Manager. So Traffic Manager decides that, okay, there's a problem with the primary region, so it will try to route the traffic to the secondary region. So that's how it works. Okay. So what we will do is, during this process, we'll set up everything. We'll set up VMs, availability set, and configure the load balancer. We'll test the application with the load balancer. Then we'll add them behind the load balancer. We'll test the traffic through traffic manager profile. Then what we will do is we'll enable replication for the virtual machine. We'll wait for the replication to complete. So once the replication is completed, we'll do the failover from the primary to secondary region. And when you do the failover, the VMs will be up and running in the target, and the traffic should automatically go to the secondary region. We'll test everything in the live sessions so that you will have some clarity. Okay, so post that I will try to explain you, how the real environment is going to be looks like, what are the different scenarios and use cases you will see, and how you can actually, implement it, and how you can experience it. Okay, so before we go into this next session, so I want to give you some procedure. What are the steps we have to follow to implement the ASR? So let me just try to make a note of it here. So ASR has a different stages. Okay, let's say ASR, and you have the source location, or let's say primary location. Okay, we are going to say primary location. We have the DR location. Okay, so in the primary location, what you are going to see, you are going to see the virtual machines, right? So we will use ASR. ASR is part of a recovery service vault. All right, and the ASR cannot be in the same location. I mean, recovery service vault cannot be in the same location as your source virtual machines. It should be in the different location. Let us say the primary location is East US location here, and the secondary is the Central US location. Okay, and here in the primary you have the virtual machines, and we are going to start the first process, which is the enable replication. So the enable replication job, what we are going to do is we are going to add these machines to ASR. And while adding these machines to ASR, we are going to specify what is the source location, what is the DR location, what is the replication policy, and how frequently you have to have the application consistency recovery point, and post failover, what is the subscription, right? What is the target subscription? What is the target resource group? What is the target VNet and subnet? Okay, if the source have the availability set or availability zone, what is the target availability zone? And if the source has energy, what is the target energy name? If the source is part of any proximity placement group, what is the target proximity placement group name? Okay, so these are the things that we are going to specify at the time of enable replication. Okay, so that post failover, Microsoft can actually, or ASR can actually use these values to create your virtual machines. So which means before you enable this replication, you need to have this environment ready in the DR location, so that while enabling replication, you will be able to see these values or these options, and you will be able to select them. Okay, so that's the primary thing. So we will enable replication. When you enable replications, your servers will be protected, or added to the ASR. Right, so then the next thing what happens is when you enable replication, the initial replication will be started. We say IR, initial replication. So initial replication, what it happens is, so it try to copy the data from source to the primary to the secondary location. In the secondary location, what do you see during this stage? You will see ASR replica disk, right? So ASR replica disk will be created in the target location, and data will be copied to this ASR replica disk during this initial replication process. So once the initial replication is completed, you will see your virtual machine as protected. Okay, and you will see the RPO value, and you will see the health status as healthy. Okay, and you will start seeing the recovery points. So once the IR is completed, initial replication is completed, you will start seeing them. Then what is the next stage? So once the recovery point is created, right? Once initial replication is completed and recovery point is created, you have an option to perform the failover. Okay, just think that, okay, so as soon as the replication is completed or initial replication is completed, you don't want to do the failover. So you might plan the failover when there is a real DR occurs. Probably, maybe, you will do this failover when you want to do the test failover or mock DR or mock failovers, right? Before your customer goes to the live, maybe you want to do the testing whether this DR will work or not. So such scenarios you'll do the failover, but otherwise you will do when there's a real situation occurs, right? So until then, right, whatever the changes are happening in the source machine has to be replicated back to the target location, right? So for that, there is another process we say delta replication. Okay, so which means whatever the replication happen, whatever the changes happen after the IR or initial replication, those changes will be replicated to the ASR replica disk. Okay, so this is a continuous replication, right? So since it is a continuous replication, so so the data will be continuously replicated here. Okay, it's a continuous replication. Okay, so during this process, it goes to IR initial replication, then delta replication will be happening. So how this, let's say somebody written some application written the data to the disk one. Let's say this VM have let's say disk one and disk 2 and so on, right? Each VM. So how does ASR knows there is some change happened on the disk one? Let's say one user logged in and he copied a Word file or Excel file into the server, right? So those file data has to be replicated to the target location. How this happens, how Microsoft or ASR knows there is some change happened. So this is all happens during the enable replication job, right? There will be agent or a service that gets installed. We call it as a mobility service agent. Okay, so this agent gets installed inside the virtual machine during the enable replication job. Okay, this agent is responsible for identifying the data in each disk and replicating back to the target ASR replica disk. That's a role, a job of this agent or a service. You'll be able to see, and during the labs, I will be able to show you everything. Okay. So this agent has a binary. Okay. So it has S2 and it has another binary. So that basically takes care of the initial replication data protection. Okay. So um, these two binaries for the initial replication, this data protection binary will take care of the replication process, and later whatever the changes happen, this S2 binary is something that takes care of the delta replication. I'll be able to show you this. Okay, so this is how the continuous replication happens and delta replication will be happening. And one fine day you decided, okay, you want to go for the failover operation. Okay, the next step is obviously there are two steps. One is the test failover. The another one is the failover option. So test failover, you can go for the test failover when you want to do it, but for the test failover, you need to have a dedicated test network, because during this process, there will be a test machine that gets created in the target location, and those machines you can log into the machines, validate the applications, and check whether it is working fine or not, whether data accuracy is there or not. You can do the test failover, and you can also clean up the test failover when you are done with the testing. So another one is a failover. So this is like a planned failover, I would say. You are maybe unplanned as well. Okay, so most of the customers do the planned failover, because very rare scenarios you see a disaster recovery situations, but they want to ensure that the failover, so this business continuity and disaster recovery solution is working fine. They go with the planned failover situations. When you do the failover, what happens is, as I said last time, so ASR is going to use this data in the disk, ASR replica disk, and it's going to perform the few tests, a few activities. Create a new disk, okay, from the ASR replica disk. That is what it will do. And next what happens is, if it creates a VM from the OS disk, which is created from the ASR replica disk. Okay, and later attach remaining data disk to the VM, newly created virtual machine. So what it will do, it will take all the replica disk and create a new disk from those replica disk. And out of all this disk, you will have the OS disk and couple of data disk, right? So from the OS disk, it's going to create a new virtual machine, and the remaining data disk, it is going to attach to this virtual machine during the failover process. And this process approximately takes 15 to 20 minutes. Sometimes, it takes 30 minutes, sometimes within 15 minutes, like 5-10 minutes also, it will be completed. So post failover, you have to perform certain, post failover validation, just to ensure that your virtual machine is part of a right subscription, right resource group, VNet, subnet, availability set, zone, and everything. If you think everything is good, then the failover was successful, and you can inform your business that the VMs are running and the application can be tested. All right. So we are not going too technical of at this time, or we are not going too tech process oriented at this time. I'm just trying to explain you the workflows that we follow, right? Enable replication, test failover, and failover, right? So now assume that the VMs are running in the target location, which is central US, and this has been running for, let's say, a 7 days example, right? 7 to 10 days. So maybe let's say 2 days also fine, right? So till the time the data is the data from the external applications or maybe external users, maybe internal users, that is being written to the servers which are running in the central US. If you decide to go back to the primary location, right? So what needs to be happen is this data, whatever the data has been written to the target, that has to be synchronized back to the source location. Before you bring the servers in the source location or primary location, the data has to be synchronized to the original location. So that process, okay, we have to say reprotect. Okay, so reprotects before there is something called commit, and we will talk about it when we try to enable the replication. Okay, so just remember this is a commit option. Okay, if I explain you this, you might be confused. So reprotect means it is same as enable replication job. When initially you enable replication from primary to secondary, and during this stage, you are enabling replication from secondary to the primary location. The only difference is it doesn't perform the initial replication. It performs the synchronization operation, which means whatever the data you have on the target, is it matching with the source? If it is not matching, whatever the delta changes happen in the target will be synchronized back to the primary, so that the primary will have the latest data. And during this process, again, you will have the ASR replica disk created, okay, in the primary this time. And once the replication is completed, reprotect is completed, you will start seeing the RPO values, and you'll start seeing the recovery points, and you will start seeing the health status as healthy. All these things you'll see. Okay, and one fine day, maybe after a couple of hours, and the replication is good, and you see everything is healthy, and you decide to go back to the primary region, that is when you're going to do the failover operation again. But this time the failover direction is from central US to the east US location. All right, so when you do the failover, what happens is the same process would work. ASR is going to use the replica disk and going to create a new disk from the VM. So new disk from the replica disk, and create a new virtual machine from the disk, and attach the remaining data disk, so that the virtual machine will be up and running in the primary location. So this is about the failover or a failback process, I would say, that we are going to follow. Okay, this is the end-to-end process that we will be implementing in our upcoming labs. All right, so before we do that, we are going to implement the environment. We are going to set up the environment. Then we'll start enabling the replication, and start seeing all these options. All right. So I don't want to give more technical stuff today. As in when we start implementing, you will come across the terminologies and these options which I explained you today. This is just like an overview about the technology that is being used for DR solution in Azure. And when we start implementing, you will get to know about this more. All right, thank you, team. Thank you for joining with me today. And in the next session, we'll try to implement the environment. then we'll try to implement this replication process. So this is not going to be completed in one day. This will take around like 2-3 days to complete, because each step has, it takes some time to complete. So we'll try to show you as detailed as possible. um, right? So in case if you have any question, feel free to ask me, or just if you're watching it on a YouTube, just try to comment it. I'm happy to, guide you further. All right. Thank you.